I was 34, surviving in New York City and dragging myself through night shifts in the ICU at Bu Hospital. Not exactly the heroic medical career I once imagined, but it paid rent and kept me fed, so I tolerated it. Nights in that place had their own personality. The dim overhead light stretched shadows across the floors, the machines hummed in this weird slow rhythm, and sometimes it felt like the building itself inhaled and exhaled. Everyone who worked there had their spooky little tales. Old hospitals store more than expired charts and broken wheelchairs. Some people swear they hold on to other things. I never bought into any of that ghost story nonsense. Not until I got assigned to room 509. The patient in there was Joseph Halloway, 43, 3 months into a coma after a brutal accident. No visitors, no family, nobody checking on him except the machines keeping him alive. There was zero reason for me to feel uncomfortable around him, but the moment I stepped inside, my skin tightened. The room felt colder than the hallway, and the smell was off. Hospitals normally smell like disinfectant, sharp and sterile. This room? Damp dirt. Like a garden after rain. I forced myself to ignore it. Night shifts mess with your senses. I checked his vitals, fixed his 4-line, and turned to leave when I heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost drowned out by the monitors. I spun around, expecting someone behind me, but the room was empty. My stomach flipped as I looked at Joseph. Eyes closed. Face still. But his lips were barely parted. I leaned closer, holding my breath. There it was again. A faint murmur slipping out of his mouth. I jerked back so hard I almost knocked over the tray. Coma patients do not whisper. I tried telling myself it was some involuntary noise, a random reflex, whatever excuse my tired brain could piece together. I reached the door, trying to escape my own nerves, when a new sound hit me. A soft, breathy chuckle. I froze. What was I supposed to tell anyone? 2 nights later, fate apparently hated me because I got assigned to room 509 again. My gut twisted before I even touched the door. Still, I had a job, and running from a coma patient wasn't exactly in the job description. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. The same steady beeping, the same dim light, the same cold air clinging to my arms. I kept a careful distance as I checked his vitals, every nerve in me waiting for another sound. But the room stayed quiet. Too quiet. Maybe I did imagine the whole thing. Lack of sleep does wonders for your sanity. Then it happened. Please, help me. Barely more than a breath, but definitely coming from Joseph. I froze. My brain scrambled for any medical explanation, involuntary vocalizations, neural misfires, muscle spasms. Nothing made this feel any less wrong. I forced myself to speak, my voice sounding tiny in the cold room. Joseph? Nothing. No twitch, no sound, nothing. I reached for the call button to alert a doctor, but the moment my fingers brushed it, his hand moved. Not a little reflexive twitch. He grabbed. I yanked my arm back like his skin was on fire. His fingers relaxed slowly, but the damage was done. My heartbeat was slamming against my ribs. Then his head turned. Just slightly. Enough to prove I was very, very screwed. Every instinct begged me to run, but I stood there like an idiot while his lips moved again. This time, the whisper was clearer. He's coming. My throat tightened. Who was coming? Why was a coma patient talking? Why was the air getting heavier, thicker, like the whole room was holding its breath? The overhead lights flickered in a slow, uneven pulse. Joseph's heart monitor spiked, beeping faster and faster. Then the whispering started again, but not from him. It came from everywhere. The vents, the ceiling, the walls. Layered voices whispering over one another, too many to make sense of. My stomach turned. I backed toward the door, grabbing the handle. It didn't move. The automatic lock was engaged. I swiped my ID. The reader blinked red. Error. And then Joseph moved again. His eyelids fluttered like something behind them was trying to break out. I pressed myself against the door, palms sweating, watching Joseph like he might snap upright any second. His mouth stretched open, too wide, wider than any normal human jaw should go, and the whispering around me grew sharper, like dozens of tiny voices crawling under my skin. I snatched my radio and tried calling for help, but the moment I pressed the button, it didn't connect. Static exploded through the speaker, loud enough to sting my ears. Then, beneath the distortion, a voice cut through. "He's here." My grip tightened on the radio, eyes darting to the hallway window. At first, nothing. Just the empty corridor bathed in low, flickering light. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. Each step made the lights dim and sink, like the building itself reacted to whatever was approaching. My hand slammed the door again, but it still wouldn't open. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt locked. The whispers around me morphed into low, distorted laughter that vibrated through the room. Joseph's eyes snapped open. Not foggy. Not confused. Focused. Sharp. Directly on me, and he smiled. A twisted, dead-eyed grin that had no business being on the face of someone who hadn't woken up in 3 months. My legs went numb. My fingers shook as I jabbed the emergency override, but nothing responded. The hallway was still empty, yet those footsteps kept coming, closer and closer, like something invisible was dragging itself toward the door. I looked back at Joseph. He wasn't lying down anymore. He was sitting up. His limbs moved stiffly, like his muscles had forgotten how to function, but something else was guiding them. His head tilted to the side with a faint crack, eyes never leaving mine. My radio buzzed again, and my own voice echoed out of it. "I need help in ICU room 6 now." The radio cut out before I could react. That's when I realized Joseph wasn't alone. A tall, warped shadow stood beside the bed. Not shaped like a person. More like a smudged outline flickering in and out, like a corrupted video frame. The air dropped to freezing, and my breath fogged in front of me. Joseph whispered again. "He's here." And the room went dark. Total blackout. The emergency red lights kicked on a second later, but honestly, that just made it worse. Every shadow stretched across the walls like they were alive, twisting, reaching. A long, ragged breath sounded directly behind me. I spun around, but there was no one. Just my reflection in the window. Except it wasn't just me. A tall, distorted shape towered behind my reflection, its fingers curling toward my shoulders. I ran. The door suddenly unlocked, and I crashed through it into the hallway, sprinting toward the nurse's station without looking back. My lungs burned, my legs barely kept up, but I didn't stop until I reached the bright lights of the main area. When I finally dared to glance behind me, down the long empty hall, Joseph was still sitting upright in his bed, smiling, like he was watching me leave. And the thing beside him. It was moving toward the door that I didn't step foot in that room again. Not after what I saw. Not after what followed me down that hallway. But the hospital didn't exactly give me a choice to never return. Night shift nurses aren't known for their luxury. Still, I avoided 509 like it was radioactive. I'd take the long way around the ICU, pretend I had extra charts to update, literally anything to keep from going near that door. Joseph died later that night. No build-up. No medical event. No alarms. Just gone. One moment alive, next moment flatline. The weirdest part. His chart vanished from the system. Everything. Notes, vitals, admission info, all erased like he'd never been admitted. When I asked about it, the charge nurse shrugged like she had no idea who I was talking about. Nobody mentioned his name again. Not once. You don't forget something like that. Weeks went by, but the memory didn't loosen its grip. That smile. Those whispers. The shape beside him. Some nights, it felt like the air around me changed when I walked past certain rooms. Heavier. Colder. Like something old and hungry had seeped into the walls. And then came the part that still gets under my skin. On the quietest nights, when the ICU is nearly dark, and the hum of machines feels too slow, I sometimes hear it. Whispering. Faint. Layered. Coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sometimes it sounds like voices behind the supply room door. Sometimes it drifts down the hallway like someone is calling to me. And sometimes, when I'm unlucky enough to pass room 509, I swear I hear a soft, breathy chuckle. Like someone is still sitting there, waiting. Back when I was 29, I worked the night shift in a Seattle ICU. Night shifts always had this weird edge to them, a mix of exhaustion and paranoia, but nothing truly prepared me for what happened in room 407. The night started like any other, stale coffee, dim hallways, machines humming in that steady heartbeat rhythm that never really stops. But that shift felt hollow. Too quiet. Like the entire hospital was holding its breath and waiting for something. My main patient that night was Harold Grayson, a 78-year-old stroke victim. Frail, unconscious, hooked up to more tubes and wires than seemed humanly necessary. His prognosis wasn't good, but he was stable enough. Weak vitals, but steady. At least, that's what I thought. Everything changed at exactly 2:17 a.m. The heart monitor from room 407 screamed through the hallway, one long, sharp alarm that drops your stomach before you even reach the door. My coworker Mark sprinted in with me, and within seconds, it was over. Flatline. No pulse. No breathing. Harold Grayson was dead. We followed protocol automatically, confirm vitals, time of death, notify his family, move his body to the morgue. Routine. But the whole time, something felt off. Maybe it was the icy blast of cold in that room, or the way his eyes were half open when the monitor cut out. Something about the moment didn't sit right. Still, we did our jobs and headed back to the nurses' station. Maybe an hour later, I walked past 407 again, and felt my entire body lock up. The door was cracked open. We'd left it completely empty. No patient, no equipment running, just a silent room. But the heart monitor was beeping. Soft. Steady. Alive. I stepped inside, pulse slamming in my throat. The bed was empty, but the screen showed a faint, uneven heartbeat. The numbers flickered, glitching between a flat line and a weak pulse like the machine couldn't decide which reality it belonged to. "Mark," I whispered, barely getting the word out. He rushed in and tried fiddling with the cables. "Probably just a glitch," he said. Right then, the monitor blasted an ear-splitting screech before collapsing into static. We both shot backward. Machines don't just do that. I started to leave when the small bathroom door inside the room creaked open. Lights off. No one assigned to the room. And yet, the silhouette of someone was standing there. My blood turned cold. I whispered, "Hello." The figure took a step forward. Mark grabbed my arm and yanked me out of the room as the overhead lights stuttered and flickered wildly. We slammed the door shut and locked it, the two of us breathing like we'd run a marathon. We reported it to security, but by the time they checked, the room was perfectly normal. No static, no glitches, no open doors. Just dead stillness. Neither Mark nor I dared say what we actually saw. Or who. But both of us knew, that room wasn't empty. Mark and I walked back to the nurses' station in total silence. Not the comfortable kind, more like two people pretending they didn't just watch a dead man's room act alive. We tried to bury ourselves in paperwork, convincing ourselves it was exhaustion messing with our eyes. Then, at 4:12 a.m., the intercom crackled to life. A blast of static punched through the hallway speakers, followed by a low voice, distorted and barely formed. It was coming from one place. Room 407. I felt my stomach drop. Mark's face drained of color. I grabbed the phone to call security again, but before I could even dial, the intercom whispered my name. Nathan. My blood froze solid. No one at that hospital used my first name. Ever. Not patients, not staff, not even my supervisors. And the way the voice said it. Quiet, breathy, like someone standing inches from the mic. Mark heard it too. His hands shook as he stepped back from the wall-mounted speaker. That was not a malfunction, he muttered. The intercom kept whispering, broken words swallowed by static. Help me. Still here. Don't leave. I slammed the button to shut the entire system off, and for a moment the hall went dead quiet. Then the lights overhead flickered violently, buzzing like they were about to blow out. Security arrived 10 minutes later, again finding nothing. No audio loops, no interference, no one in the room. They chalked it up to electrical failure and walked off like they hadn't just ignored a paranormal voicemail that I was ready to clock out early, go home, and pretend the world wasn't falling apart in the ICU. That's when the morgue called. You guys brought a patient down here earlier, right? The assistant sounded uneasy. Yeah, I said, already knowing this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. Harold Grayson. Room 407. Silence. Too long. Can you two come down here? Now. Mark and I exchanged a look neither of us wanted to acknowledge. We both knew exactly which patient this was about. We headed to the basement. My chest tightened with every step. The assistant didn't even try hiding how freaked out he was. He led us to Harold's body, still under the white sheet on the metal slab. The problem wasn't the body. It was the monitor hooked up beside him. The heart monitor was beeping. A slow, irregular, but unmistakable heartbeat. My skin prickled so hard it hurt. Mark stammered something useless, trying to rationalize the impossible. Then the sheet moved. Just a small twitch. Enough to make every single one of us freeze. Harold's fingers curled under the sheet, the room went dead silent. None of us breathed. We just stared at the faint movement under the sheet like idiots waiting for it to happen again. My pulse hammered so hard I could hear it in my teeth. I forced myself to step closer. I had checked Harold myself. He was cold. Lifeless. Absolutely, unquestionably dead. But now his hand was moving like he was trying to grab something. Or someone. Mark whispered, voice trembling, we have to check. I didn't want to. The morgue assistant didn't want to. No sane person would want to. But protocol demanded we verify. With fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else, I lifted the corner of the sheet. Harold's face stared back at me. Eyes wide open. Glass-like. Blank and unblinking. His mouth hung slightly open, frozen mid-breath, but his skin was cold and stiff. Everything screamed dead, except the traitor monitor beside him, chirping out a weak heartbeat like it wanted to rewrite reality. Then his lips moved. A tiny flutter. Barely anything, but I saw it. I jerked back, the sheet slipping through my hands. My knees nearly buckled. Mark leaned forward, whispering Harold's name like a guy trying not to wake something that shouldn't be awake in the first place. The second the name left his mouth, the heart monitor spiked, then flatlined. A long, sharp scream of a tone filled the morgue. The morgue assistant lunged for the emergency button, but before he could press it, Harold's mouth stretched open into a grotesque, impossible shape. A sickening sound tore through the room, a gasp, but twisted, wet, like someone inhaling for the first time in decades. And that was enough for me. I grabbed Mark and bolted. The metal double doors swung open as we sprinted into the hallway. Behind us, the flatline tone wailed endlessly, echoing through the cold basement corridor. We didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't even talk until we reached the elevator. By the time security responded, the monitor was off. Harold wasn't moving. His body looked perfectly still again. Just like nothing had happened. The hospital quietly updated records. Harold Grayson, time of death, once. They didn't acknowledge the second heartbeat. They didn't log the events. They didn't ask questions. No one wanted to touch the truth. Mark and I never talked about that night again. Not once. But some things don't let you forget. Even now, when the ICU lights dim and the hall gets too quiet, I swear I hear it. A faint whisper of my name, drifting from an empty room that should have stayed empty. Back when I was 29, I worked nights as a patient care tech in a San Francisco hospital. It wasn't my first time in the medical field, but it was definitely the most unnerving place I'd ever worked. The ICU at night had this suffocating energy to it, dim hallways, flickering lights, that cold chemical smell that never really fades. The silence was the worst part, because it wasn't actually silent. There were always faint sounds, beeps, air vents, distant footsteps, that made you feel like the building was alive. The hospital was old. Sure, they renovated the walls and polished the floors, but the bones of the place were ancient. Some of the staff joked that parts of the ICU hadn't changed since the 1950s. I never cared enough to listen to those stories. Not until the bed in room 409 started moving. Room 409 sat at the very end of the West Wing, usually reserved for patients who needed constant monitoring. But at that time, it was empty. The last patient had died a week earlier, and no one had been assigned there since. Around 2 a.m., I was walking past and noticed the bed wasn't where it was supposed to be. It had shifted several inches forward. Weird, because the wheels were locked, and nobody had entered the room since the patient passed. I pushed it back, double-checked the locks, and chalked it up to someone bumping it earlier. An hour later, I passed by again. The bed had moved even farther. This time nearly a foot away from the wall. Wheels still locked. A cold ripple went down my back. I pushed it back again, forcing myself to ignore the way the room felt colder than the rest of the wing. The next night, I made sure to check the room again around 2 a.m. Just to prove to myself that nothing was wrong. Then I heard it. A scraping sound. Slow. Heavy. Coming from 409. I turned the corner and felt my stomach drop. The bed was now dead center in the room. I stepped inside, every nerve in me tightening. The monitors were all unplugged. The air felt heavy, thick enough to taste. Something about that emptiness felt aware. I told one of the nurses about it, expecting a laugh. She didn't laugh. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she sighed and said, "Yeah, that room does that sometimes." I stared at her. "What do you mean, does that?" She just shrugged. "People say the last patient who died there never really left." I wanted to believe she was messing with me. But the dread settling in my stomach said otherwise. I tried to pretend her comment didn't get to me, but for the rest of the week the room messed with my head. No matter how many times I put the bed back and made sure the wheels were locked tight, it moved again the next night. Sometimes just a few inches. Sometimes almost across the room. Finally, out of pure frustration, I set up my phone to record the room for a few hours. I figured I'd catch someone sneaking in or prove to myself the bed wasn't actually moving. The footage ruined that plan. For more than an hour, nothing happened. The bed sat still, perfectly centered on screen. Then, exactly at 2:03 a.m., it jerked forward a few inches. No rolling. No signs of force. Just a sudden, unnatural drag. Then it moved again. And again. My hands went cold watching it. I shut the phone off and didn't show anyone. If I did, they'd either think I faked it or, worse, they'd believe it. The following night, I checked the room earlier. The bed was back against the wall, locked, secured, exactly how it should be. I even put a small strip of tape on the floor next to the bed leg, just to see if it would tear. Midway through my rounds, around 2 a.m., I forced myself to walk past 409. The tape was ripped clean in half. And the bed was once again in the middle of the room. My breath caught. The air felt freezing. Not cold, frozen. Like stepping into a walk-in freezer. As I stood there staring, the janitor, an older guy named Luis, walked up behind me. He glanced into the room and shook his head slowly. "Don't mess with that bed," he muttered under his breath. I asked him what he meant. He didn't stop walking. "Something in there doesn't like being disturbed." That was all he gave me. That should have been enough, but apparently I have the self-preservation instincts of a wet paper towel. I started paying attention to every weird thing connected to room 409. The monitor, unplugged, would flicker randomly. The call button lit up even when no one was assigned there. The security cameras glitched whenever pointed at that room, static drowning the feed. It was like the room didn't want to be watched. Then one night, I was alone in the hallway when I heard it. A scraping noise. Slow. Heavy. Rhythmic. My stomach twisted as I turned my head. The bed was moving. Not drifting. Not shifting. Moving. Rolling straight toward the doorway, then stopping just before crossing into the hall. I don't know what possessed me, but I stepped closer. The air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. As soon as I reached out to touch the mattress, the entire bed lurched forward an inch. I didn't walk away. I ran. For the rest of that week, I didn't go anywhere near room 409. I'd take the long route around the wing, pretend I suddenly loved paperwork, anything to avoid that doorway. But curiosity is a stupid, stubborn thing, and mine kept chewing at me. On my last night shift before my days off, I made one major mistake. I asked questions. Maria, one of the older nurses, was at the station finishing notes when I finally caved and asked her about the room. For a moment, she didn't answer. Her whole expression shifted, like I had just asked about something people weren't supposed to talk about. "That room," she started quietly, glancing down the hallway as if someone might be listening. "A few years back, there was a patient there. In a coma. No visitors, no family. One night his heart stopped. Nurses rushed in to resuscitate him." She paused, swallowed, and looked right at me. "And the bed started moving on its own." A chill spread through my chest. "They said it slid across the floor like something was trying to pull it away from the wall. After that, the room was never the same. Some people think he never left. I don't go near it after dark." Her voice was steady, but her eyes told me she meant every word. I couldn't get the story out of my head. It gnawed at me. Every time I walked the hallway, I felt the weight of that room, like something inside was watching for me specifically. Later that night, during my rounds, I reached the end of the corridor and froze. The door to room 409 was open. Not wide, just enough that it looked like someone had nudged it with their fingertips. I knew I hadn't left it that way. The bed was sitting in the middle again, but this time something was off. The sheets on top were pressed down slightly. Like someone was lying there. Invisible. My mouth went dry. I reached for my phone, thinking if I could get a picture, maybe I could prove this wasn't just my brain eating itself from lack of sleep. Before I could lift the camera, the call button above the bed lit up. A sharp beep sliced through the silent hallway. The sheets shifted. Slow, deliberate movement. As if someone was adjusting themselves under the covers. The bed suddenly slammed forward, wheels screeching loudly as it barreled toward the wall. I didn't wait around to find out why. I took off running. Full sprint back down the hallway, lungs burning, heart racing, adrenaline drowning out every sound except the echo of those spinning wheels behind me. That was the moment I decided I was done playing caretaker for ghosts. That I didn't give anyone the real reason, but I told my supervisor I wasn't doing rounds near room 409 anymore. She didn't push back, and honestly, that told me everything I needed to know. Something about that room was bigger than any of us wanted to admit. A week later, I heard the hospital finally removed the bed entirely. No official explanation. No memo. Just gone. Vanished. Like they didn't want staff asking questions anymore. Did it solve anything? I doubt it. Whatever lingered in that room wasn't tied to the metal frame. And I knew it. Even after the bed disappeared, I avoided that hallway. I'd feel the temperature drop whenever I got too close. Sometimes the surveillance screens would glitch for a second when the feed switched to that corner of the ICU. Sometimes the door would be cracked open again, even though no one used that room anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside was waiting. Watching. I tried moving on, different rooms, different tasks, anything to keep my brain busy. But the fear stuck. It didn't matter where I was in the hospital, empty beds made my skin crawl. Even the sight of neatly folded sheets felt wrong, like they were holding a shape I couldn't see. And then came the part that still haunts me. Some nights, when the wing is quiet and the vents are humming and I'm alone in the hall, I hear it. A low dragging sound. Wheels scraping softly across the floor. I freeze every time. No matter where I am in the building, no matter how far away room 409 should be, it always sounds like it's coming from right behind me. And somehow, the door to 409, no matter how many times people swear they've closed it, is always just slightly open. I was 36 when this happened. I just moved to Oklahoma City for a new job as a night shift ICU nurse. The hours were brutal, but I didn't mind, until one particular night made me wish I'd chosen literally any other career. It was late October, and the hospital felt emptier than usual. The kind of empty that makes your skin tighten for no real reason. The air running through the vents was colder than normal, and even though I was used to the eerie calm of night shifts, that night felt wrong. ICUs are always unnervingly quiet, but this was different. The fluorescent lights buzzed weakly overhead, flickering just enough to make every shadow look like it wanted attention. I was doing my usual rounds when it started. Room 306 had been unoccupied for weeks. The last patient assigned there had passed away, and no one had used it since. But as I walked by, something made me stop. There was someone standing beside the bed. An outline. A shape. A figure. My heart stuttered before my brain even processed what I was seeing. I took a step back, looked again, and the room was empty. The bed perfectly made. The monitors unplugged. Nothing inside except stale air. I sucked in a breath, trying to convince myself my eyes were being dramatic. Then I heard it. A whisper. My name. So soft it barely existed, but close enough that it felt like someone was standing behind me and leaning in. A chill snaked up my spine. No one else was around. The nurse's station was far down the hall. The whole wing felt deserted that I forced myself to keep moving, but every time I passed that room, I heard something. A whisper. A faint breath. A hum. Always quiet. Always intentional. By 3 a.m., nerves had chewed through whatever bravery I had left. I needed to check inside just to shut my own brain up. The room was empty. Again. But the moment I stepped inside, the air shifted. Heavy. Thick. Like walking into an underwater space where sound shouldn't exist. The bed moved. Not by much, just a small indentation on the mattress, as if someone had pressed a hand down. I froze, fingers curled around the doorframe. There were no windows open. No drafts. No reason for that mattress to shift. I reached toward the light switch, breath trembling in my throat, when the whisper came again. Louder. Right behind me. I spun around so fast the world blurred, expecting someone to be standing there. But the hallway was empty. Just square tiles and distance. My heart pounded in my ears as I shut the door and walked away way faster than I'd admit. I kept telling myself it was exhaustion. That I was imagining things. That long shifts mess with your senses. But the truth settled deep in my bones. Something was in that room. And it knew me. By the time I sat down at the nurse's station, my nerves were shredded. The other nurses were on break, and I was alone, just me, the dim monitors, and the hum of machines echoing down the hall. That's when I saw it. The surveillance feed for room 306 flickered. Static crawled across the screen like a swarm. For a split second, I thought it was just interference, until the picture sharpened, and my breath caught in my throat. There was someone in the room. A pale figure stood at the foot of the bed, facing away from the camera. Completely still. No movement. No shaking. Just a solid, silent shape staring at nothing. I leaned closer to the monitor, pulse hammering. Before I could reach for the radio, the figure vanished. The feed snapped back to normal, empty bed, empty room, nothing but shadows. I called security anyway, even though my voice shook when I tried to sound calm. They arrived a few minutes later, checked the room thoroughly, and found absolutely nothing. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. No explanation. They blamed it on a glitch. Because, that's the universal answer for anything terrifying in a hospital. I didn't mention the whisper that kept calling my name. Or the outline I saw earlier. Or the way the bed had moved under an invisible weight. I just nodded like a coward and tried to act functional. When my shift finally ended, I packed my things and headed out. But before I left the building, I heard it one more time. A whisper. Right at my ear. Warm enough to feel the breath. Wait. I spun around, expecting someone to be standing behind me. But the hallway was empty, the ICU buzzing faintly. The world looking normal again. Except I couldn't shake it, even when I went home, the feeling followed me. I lay in bed long after sunrise, staring at the ceiling, convinced I wasn't alone in that room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty hospital bed in 306. The slight indent on the mattress. The pale figure on the monitor. Sleep didn't stand a chance. Every sound in my apartment made me flinch. A pipe creaked, I jolted. My refrigerator hummed, I sat up straight. It felt like someone else was in the room, just out of sight. Watching. Around 3 a.m. the next night, I bolted upright in bed. A whisper. Soft. Familiar. Wait. It came from the foot of my bed. But when I turned on the light, the room was empty, just my pile of scrubs and the dim glow from the street lamp outside. But the dread stayed. Deep. Settled. As if something from room 306 had followed me home. The next night back at work, I pretended everything was normal. I avoided room 306 like it was radioactive, stuck close to the nurse's station, and kept my eyes glued to my charting. But pretending only works until reality smacks you in the face. Around 2 a.m., an alert went off. Room 306. A motion detector. My stomach sank so fast it felt like my body hollowed out. I stared at the monitor as the feed flickered, static washing over the screen in jagged bursts. For a moment, nothing was visible. Then the image cleared. The figure was back. Standing in the exact same spot at the foot of the bed. Still. Silent. Facing away from the camera. A cold sweat rolled down my neck. I reached for my radio, ready to call security, again. But before I could even press the button, the screen glitched back to an empty room. No figure. No movement. No sign anything had triggered the sensor. Every instinct I had screamed don't go in there, but logic is a terrible motivator. I had to confirm it wasn't a real intruder. So I walked down the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last. The lights buzzed softly overhead. The air felt colder, thicker, like the hallway was narrowing around me. When I reached the door, I froze. It wasn't closed. It wasn't open. It was just cracked. A sliver of darkness leaking out into the hall. I pushed it open slowly, my hand trembling against the metal. The room looked normal. Bed made. Lights off. Nothing out of place. But the second I stepped inside, the temperature dropped. A cold pressure wrapped around my wrist, light, but real. Like fingers that weren't entirely solid. I jerked my arm back so fast I nearly stumbled. My heart pounded as I backed out of the room, but before the door fully closed, I heard it. Rustling. Fabric shifting. Footsteps. Slow. Unmistakable. Moving toward the door. I backed away as fast as I could without running. Then the whisper came, clearer than ever. "Why didn't you help me?" The voice was right at the door. I didn't stick around. I bolted down the hallway, practically sliding into the nurse's station, legs shaking so hard I had to grab the desk to stay upright. My coworker asked if I was okay, but I couldn't form a single useful word. I just stared down the hall like something might crawl out of that room and follow me. For the rest of my shift, I avoided 306 completely. No rounds. No glancing in that direction. Nothing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't finished with me. Whatever lived in that room wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to reach me. And I had no idea why that I tried pretending I could avoid room 306 forever, but whatever was in there had other plans. The next night, as soon as I started my rounds, I felt it, that same pressure in the air, that sinking weight in my chest that told me the room wasn't done with me. When I reached the hallway leading to 306, my breath caught. The door was open again. Barely. Just enough for the darkness inside to spill out into the corridor. The bed, once perfectly made, had an indentation in the center. Like someone had just sat up. Or just gotten out. My legs felt glued to the floor, but something deeper than fear pushed me forward. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe I needed answers. Maybe I was just too tired to keep running. I stepped inside. The air shifted the moment I crossed the threshold. Heavy. Pressing down on my shoulders, squeezing my lungs. I swallowed hard and whispered. "Who are you?" Silence. The room felt colder, denser. I tried again, my voice barely holding steady. "What do you want?" For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then it came, the faintest, softest shuffle across the floor. Like someone invisible shifting their weight. I turned toward the bed. The sheets moved. Not randomly. Not from airflow. Deliberate movement. A slow indentation formed on the mattress, sinking down as if someone invisible was lying back into it. My skin prickled so hard it hurt. The heart monitor beside the bed flickered, unplugged, yet turning on, and let out 2 deliberate beeps. Rhythmic. Recognizable. A heartbeat. And suddenly, I knew. I rushed to the nurse's station and grabbed the patient records. My fingers shook as I flipped through the files, my eyes scanning for the answer I dreaded. Room 306. Last patient admitted. Daniel Carter. The man I had seen struggling on his last night. The one I hadn't reached in time. The one who died on the way in. Except he hadn't died in the ambulance. He had died here. In this exact room. In that exact bed. And whatever had been calling me, whispering to me, had been trying to finish something he never got to say. My throat tightened. My chest hurt. I walked back to the room slowly, feeling the weight of every step. The indentation on the bed was still there. Waiting. I swallowed the fear burning in my throat and whispered. I'm sorry. I didn't know. The air changed. Not warm. Not cold. Just, lighter. Like something finally unclenched around the room. The sheets smoothed out slowly, as if someone unseen had let go. The heart monitor beeped once more, softer this time, almost like acknowledgement. Then came the final whisper. Thank you. And the room fell silent. I didn't last long after that. I quit a few weeks later, unable to walk past that door without feeling eyes on me. But even after leaving, the presence never fully disappeared. Some nights, when the world is quiet and my apartment is dark, I wake up to a faint voice whispering my name. Not angry. Not hostile. Just waiting.